And the last challenge that we wanted to tackle today was deploying assessment online. And for this, we'll begin with another poll question. This time, we wanted to know, what are your concerns with hosting assessments online? And so in a second, you will see the poll appear on your device. And it should be there right now. You can select all that apply here. It will give people a couple of more seconds. All right. Aha, fantastic. Yes, you are absolutely correct. These are all concerns that we have when we try to assess learners in the online environment. And so in the next few slides, we're going to give you a few ideas of how you can try and ameliorate some of these issues. So based on our experience, we can safely say that our learners will discuss and collaborate when they are working on an exam. And we also know that they will access all the resources that are available online or in textbook format. So for our purposes, we treat all of our assessments as open book exams. And this requires us to write the questions that appear on the exam on the level of application, where we're asking the learners to use the information. It could be used to solve a particularly challenging analysis problem, an equation, or we can ask our students to synthesize information from different sources because they have access to different sources. And these types of questions have answers that are not available online. Students will not be able to find this anywhere, even in textbooks, because you can customize it for your particular course. And even if students discuss and collaborate together, this process of discussion will actually help them learn the content that you're hoping to test them on. So here are quick examples of application level question that you can deploy in an online learning management system. We have two probabilistic storm surge products that our learners need to interpret correctly and then decide what is the level of storm surge that they need to communicate to the authorities of Camp Lejeune who are trying to prepare for an oncoming tropical cyclone. Now, a more complex question is on the screen right now. We have provided our learners with access to probabilistic QPF guidance and deterministic QPF guidance, and then we have placed them in a scenario in which they have received a question from an emergency manager in the small town of Apalachicola right there, and the students need to answer that question. Now, in the question, we have placed misconceptions about the products that are in front of them on the screen. And so our learners need to interpret the products correctly, identify the misconceptions in the question, and then form an answer that will explain the correct interpretation and also the kind of forecast that they need to prepare for in Apalachicola. Now, assessment has many different components, and I would like to ask Andrea to discuss this slide.
Sure. This is just some common items that have come up regarding assessment and in our discussions with university professors in the past. One of the things that comes up is, needing a blend of sorts of immediate feedback and delayed feedback type assignments. And what I mean there is, for immediate feedback, if you have an assignment, that means that the student could go in and take it and, check off their answers. Or if it's some sort of written format, that you would have them submit that, and then upon submission, the system automatically makes a solution set available to them or gives them some sort of question by question feedback immediately after answering the question. And that can become very important if you're doing primarily asynchronous instruction, because otherwise, they may not have the usual opportunities to come in and ask a professor for feedback, say after class, things like that. So it's nice to have that available for them in addition to the standard, maybe weekly assignments that are then hand graded and take a while to get them the feedback. Another question that comes up often is when you're doing manual grading of things, especially things like derivations or other analysis for the topic of weather. We saw that drawing tool earlier. You can still have them submit things like they would in a traditional classroom on paper. It is really nice if they have access to a touch device, a touch laptop, or some sort of tablet, and they can do the actual drawings or the derivations that way, save it as an electronic file, and submit it. If that's not available, I've even done things in the past where students had various technologies or did not have various technologies, and they were doing something as simple as writing it out on paper, this big derivation, and then taking a snapshot of it with their phone and submitting that as a file. Excuse me. So it can still be graded that way. Another thing that I've heard from folks a lot about is trying video-based or audio-based feedback. I think that can be, sometimes it sounds counterintuitive, like providing a video snippet or audio snippet to different groups or individuals for feedback on their assignments does sound time consuming. I think some of that depends on maybe the speed at which you would type or write it out instead. It really depends. But that can be a way to offer some richer feedback on some of the more complex assignments that you give. And it also can help still maintain that connection that they would normally get with you in the face-to-face environment and build more of that community. And then lastly, whenever you're doing any of your assessments, and especially in this online environment, it's great to ensure clear and easily accessible grading rubrics so that the students understand how they're being graded, and there won't have to be as many, perhaps, emails back and forth about those types of things when questions come up.
Thank you, Andrea. And this slide we placed here because we wanted to be very frank with you. Some of your students will try to avoid doing the hard work of completing the exam by themselves. And so here are our suggestions for how you can discourage that type of behavior. The first one is to create a test student account in your LMS. When you create the tests, sometimes we tend to leave unintended clues in our questions, and the environment in which we create the test does not actually show us how the test is going to display for our students. So having a test student account is a great way to catch those unintended clues because you're seeing exactly what your students will be seeing. Another idea is to place a time limit on the online assessment so that the students will not have a whole day in order to search for answers online or talk with their classmates or friends about the questions. We also want to encourage you to monitor the activity either during the exam period or afterwards. Sometimes we find that students tend to try and guess the answers to all of the questions as opposed to doing the readings, and that shows up as many consecutive tries in quick succession. So if you see something like that appearing in your learning management system, you can place a limit on the number of tries. So your students will only have 2 tries or 3 tries to submit the quiz if you wanted to give them that. Now, another thing that you could do is if you notice that students have submitted answers that look suspiciously similar, you can take a look in your course management system to see whether they submitted their assignments or exams at approximately the same time, and that's an indicator that they might have worked together. If you want to discourage that behavior, another strategy is to create a question bank in your course management system, and then it will offer different versions of the exam to different students. In that way, if students begin working together, they will quickly discover that they're working on different questions and they can't collaborate as much as they may have wanted to. We also recommend that you always randomize the options in your questions. That places a little bit more effort on the part of those students who are trying to guess the answers and perhaps are trying the quiz many times. And lastly, if you write your questions on the level of application, problem solving, or synthesis of information, those answers will not be found in a textbook or online. And so the students will have to put that work in answering the questions. And lastly, we wanted to mention something about the workload that you can expect. And for this, I'd like to turn it to Andrea again.
Thanks, Vet. Yeah, so there is some anecdotal evidence that we hear on a semi-regular basis. And there's also some documented evidence that does suggest that the faculty workload for an entirely online class can be somewhat greater than that of a traditional face-to-face interaction. And I think that's largely true for at least the first time that you're transitioning all of your materials to an online environment. And I think that's very similar to any other first time you're teaching either a new subject that you haven't taught before or in any other new format. So along those lines, it's great if you have a Center for Teaching Excellence or an educational technology department that's standalone or within your IT department. And those are great resources that you can access to get their perspectives on how to design your course, but also how to troubleshoot, how to do some of the technology and integrate that in an efficient manner. Always rely on your TAs and try to get them involved as well, and that can help share the workload, if you will, but it's also a good experience for them too, to learn how to do things more in an online environment that will probably help serve them for years to come. That being said, the good news is that research does show that well-designed distance education courses can show similar learning outcomes as in-person courses, and that's across a great variety of topics.
Thank you, Andrea. So this is your opportunity to ask us questions. If you've had any questions up to now and you wanted to ask them, this is a great time to do so. Also, if there have been any questions in the chat that people have had that want to see answers to, please, this is the time to ask us. And if you wanted to ask an audio question, just go to the bottom left of your screen and then click on the microphone, and then we'll be able to hear you.